Good morning, AACS. It's Miss Black here, and I've got today's devotion for you. So, as difficult and frustrating as much of this quarantine has been, one of the things that I have actually really appreciated is having a less hurried feel to my life. Like so many of you, I often feel like I am rushing from one thing to the next. And sometimes I feel like I can't be present in any given moment because I'm always thinking about what I have to do next. So I really appreciated being able to slow down and not feeling like I have to rush. In particular, one thing that I've enjoyed is being able to have an extended quiet time in the morning when I can pray and journal and read my Bible without having to think about getting ready to drive to school and really just take all of the time that I need. And in doing so, when I really slow down and really pay attention, I notice things that I would normally miss. So, one of the things that I've been studying over the last couple of weeks is the book of Philippians. Philippians is one of my favorite books because it is full of encouragement and hope. There are so many famous passages from the book of Philippians that we hear quoted all of the time. And it's in this book where Paul encourages the church in Philippi to be content in all circumstances, to rejoice in the Lord no matter what's going on around them, and not to be anxious about anything. And in the midst of quarantine, that felt like a really appropriate thing to study when there is just so much unknown about the world around us. It can be really easy to feel anxious and worried about those things. And in the book of Philippians, Paul is writing from prison. He is in a really difficult circumstance himself, and yet he keeps telling the Philippians to rejoice no matter what their circumstances are and to follow his example in doing so. And I think that we can often hold people like Paul up to the status of super Christian, that they have everything together, they have all of the answers, they are following Jesus just the way that they should be. And sometimes, I don't know about you, but it's true for me, I can feel like I am just missing the mark. Like I'm not good enough. I'm somebody who does prone to be anxious and to worry. And I know that I shouldn't. And then I get frustrated with myself and beat myself up for worrying. And so I come back to books like Philippians for encouragement. But as I slowed down over the last couple of weeks and read it, I picked up on a verse that I had never noticed before in Philippians chapter 2. In this section of the letter, he's telling them that he's going to send back Epaphroditus. So, Epaphroditus is a man from the church in Philippi who had come to visit Paul with gifts from the Philippians, but he had been taken ill while he was there and he almost died. And the church in Philippi was really worried about him. And so, Paul wants to send him back. And I want to read you what this verse says. So Paul says, I am the more eager to send him, therefore, that you may rejoice at seeing him again, and that I may be less anxious. I have never noticed that verse before. Honestly, it's in one of those sections that we tend not to read very closely because he's talking about personal relationships with the church in Philippi, and we tend to think, well, that doesn't apply to us as well, so we skip that. But Paul admits here that he has been anxious about Epaphroditus. And I was really just kind of struck by that when I was reading, because Paul goes on then in the rest of the letter to command the Philippians not to be anxious, but to go to prayer, to thank the Lord for their circumstances, to rejoice in all things. And I have always thought that Paul is writing that simply to encourage the Philippians, which I absolutely think he is doing that. But I also think Paul's writing that because he needs to be reminded of that himself. When he tells them not to be anxious, it's not because he has mastered the art of not being anxious or because he has gotten himself to a point where his faith is so strong that he doesn't worry about anything. I think that he writes some of these things because he needs to hear them just as much as the church in Philippi does. And while he might be farther along on his journey with the Lord than they are, that he has not reached the end of that journey, that he is still struggling and learning all of the time. And I think that this may be even more of an encouragement for us who know that we fall and falter and make mistakes and don't live up to the commands of Jesus all of the time. And those of us who tend to beat ourselves up about that and get frustrated that we haven't moved farther along in our journey of faith than we have. But the reality is that every single one of us is learning. Every single one of us is growing, and nobody is doing it perfectly. And there are going to be moments, especially in the midst of something like a quarantine, where you face anxiety, where you struggle to obey the commands of Jesus. Um, that doesn't make you any less of a Christian or any less loved by the Lord. We all have those struggles. And what I want to encourage you to do is that when you find yourself being anxious, when you find yourself stressed out or worried, or facing fears or discontentment, acknowledge them, confess them to the Lord, and go to his word for help and encouragement. Continue to go back to it over and over and over again. If Paul needs to constantly remind himself of the truth of the gospel, then how much more do we need to constantly remind ourselves of the truth of the gospel? And so hopefully this is an encouragement to you that, just because you sometimes falter and fail in your faith, it doesn't make you any less of a child of God who is beloved by him. Take those things to the Lord and trust them to him. Remind yourself every single day what is true. Remind those around you, because we need reminders just as much as everyone else. So guys, I love you. I hope that you are doing well. Hang in there for these last few days, and blessings on your summer.